Hello everyone, and welcome to the 202nd episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Adas from Star Wars. So I finally decided how frequently I'm going to upload Star Wars related content. As many of you will be aware, between all the Dark Jedi, Sith Lords, bounty hunters, government officials, organizations, dark side creatures, and everything else in between in both Legends and canon, there's hundreds, if not close to 1,000 evil characters and entities to discuss in the Star Wars universe. And if I only made these videos every so often, I probably wouldn't be able to cover them all before I croaked. So I've decided that in addition to your regularly scheduled weekly Analyzing Evil episodes, I'm going to also upload a Star Wars episode every week as well, which should make covering all these characters a little easier. It's still going to take years, maybe even a decade, but a decade is a whole lot better than several decades, and I figured all of you wouldn't mind getting a second episode in your feed every week. That being said, not all Star Wars characters are as intricate as some of the heavy hitters in this franchise, so some of these videos are going to end up being quite short, and such is the case with this video. However, I am committed to covering every evildoer in this franchise, no matter how big or small, and if you'd like to learn more about what order I'm going in when covering these characters, be sure to check out the episode I made on Now a while back to learn more. So with all that out of the way, in this video, we're going to be talking about Adas, the first and last king of the Sith, and the original claimant to the title of Sithari. And while what we've been given on his character isn't too expansive, he is a very important figure as far as evil in Star Wars is concerned, which you'll soon discover. And since this intro has been long enough already, without further ado, let's begin. In the last episode on the Rakata, we talked about how their species, due to their incredibly violent natures, were highly in tune with the dark side of the Force. And though they're very different in a few key ways, the Sith species shared many similarities with the Rakata. The Sith species, who originated on the planet Korriban, were one of the earliest recorded species in galactic history. Like the Rakata, the Sith were one of the most widely Force-sensitive species to ever live in the galaxy, with most if not all of them being Force-sensitive in some small or great way. Now, Korriban has nearly always been considered a nexus for the dark side. However, it's unknown whether or not Korriban has always been a nexus for the dark side, and if it has, that surely pushed the Sith towards developing more aggressive natures. However, it's possible that the Sith species' natures drew the dark side to the planet and made it into a dark side nexus. And considering the various planets that have become nexuses for the dark side have typically become that way due to the influence of its inhabitants, I'd err towards the latter. Despite their relative isolation from the galaxy at large, save for their contact with the Thoyor that spirited some of their number away to Tython, and the Rakata, an interesting possible influence on the Sith society and natures could have been their long-forgotten contact with another species that, while not enmeshed so thoroughly in the dark side, are incredibly ruthless and brutal by nature: the Anzadi. The Anzadi are a race of Force-sensitive beings that use two tentacle-like proboscises that they hide in their cheeks to feed on the life force of other sentient beings, drinking what they refer to as a being's soup, and it's possible that the Anzadi had early contact with the Sith. Here's an excerpt on the subject from an article on StarWars.com that was written by Abel G. Pena in 2006. The term Sith was once used to describe a variety of beings, and was not always synonymous with the dark side. Originally not only a cult, but a cultured species before they were subjugated by Dark Jedi exiles, the blood-colored humanoid Sith people lived a superficially barbaric, though surprisingly harmonious existence on their homeworld Korriban. Sentient sacrifices to their gods, dining on blood soup, a rigid and prejudiced caste system, and war between nations were all common in Sith culture. These barbarous practices were accepted not as contrary or antagonistic to life, but integral to it. War was quite literally a concept on par with peace or serenity. Conceptually, the Sith people did not, or could not differentiate one state from the other. There was, ultimately, only existence. Some historians have speculated that the attitudes of the early Sith people were owed to a prehistoric encounter between their species and the vampiric beings known as the Anzadi. Volf Karko, a rare Anzat Jedi known for his prolonged study of one of the Jedi Temple's rare Sith holocrons, was fond of reminding his fellow knights that the Anzadi remembered the very first Sith. Beyond the anecdotal though, there is no solid evidence to support this theory. While their contact with the first Sith is disputed, there is no dispute that the Anzadi did come into contact with a Sith during Adas's reign, as his contact with them is recorded in the Book of Sith, so they definitely influenced them at some point, if not at the beginning. So with a little bit of possible cultural crossing with the Anzadi, their natures ruling their actions much like any other species, and the dark side augmenting their darker tendencies, the Sith lived a tribal and fragmented existence, much like the Rakata, with hedonism, intertribal violence, and war ruling their actions more so than anything else. And in doing so, they transformed Korriban into a veritable dark side paradise, with creatures like Terentatex, Shirax, Tukata, and Hissis evolving on the planet as twisted aberrations of whatever creatures they were before the dark took root. Now, though it's said that the Sith civilization began in earnest around the year 100,000 BBY, the Dark Jedi Source Sin recorded in her chronicle that the monuments in the Valley of Golg were created before the Zell civilization began on Coruscant in 200,000 BBY. However, while a more civilized societal structure developed around that year, Sith society was far from being cohesive. Kings, despots, and warlords carved out petty kingdoms for themselves throughout Korriban, and who knows how many nations rose and fell over the course of thousands of years. Unlike the Rakata though, who were so wantonly violent that only the arrival of the Qua and their gift of technology united them, the Sith created a structured society based on a caste system that was lorded over by the most powerful of darkside sorcerers and brutally powerful individuals who could gain the right to rule over their brethren through overwhelming might. For 72,000 years, Korriban and its people were divided by numerous fragmented nations that constantly warred with one another. But in the year 28,000 BBY, that would all change. Sometime before this year, an exceptionally exceptional being was born to the Sith, a boy whose very birth made that immediately apparent to his red-skinned brethren when he was born with skin as black as charcoal: Adas. Because of this unusual genetic feature, Adas was considered a chosen being and was raised as such, which became ever more apparent as he grew to a gargantuan size and showed his natural affinity for Sith magic and warfare, and he had the honor of being the first ever Sith to unite his species under one banner, for which he by right earned the title of King of them all. Now, detailed accounts of Adas's life and legacy are hard to come by, but there are a few sources we can look to for information. From a codex entry that can be found in the Star Wars The Old Republic MMO, we receive the following. The ancient Sith on Korriban, not an order of Force users, but a distinct species native to the planet, were distinctive for their yellow eyes and blood-red skin. But the warrior Adas was unlike his brothers. His skin was jet black, and he towered over his fellow Sith. Through violence and cunning, he fought his way to become ruler of the Sith, and united their nations through a bloody war. He later took the title Sithari, meaning Overlord. King Adas's ascension may have been helped by an untrained Force sensitivity. Certainly Adas was long-lived. His reign lasted 300 years, and only came to an end when the Infinite Empire launched an assault on Korriban. The title Sithari remains a key tenet of Sith lore, eventually coming to refer to a perfect being in Sith philosophy. Here's another summation of Adas's life from that article I quoted earlier when talking about the Anzadi. A peculiarity of the Sith people was their innate tendency toward left-handedness. This led to their creation of the Lanvarok, a forearm-mounted weapon that was adapted strictly for left-handed use. Human Sith lords later crafted a right-handed version. Pure-blooded Sith were also steadily bred out as their genes were eventually alchemically mixed with those of humanoid Dark Jedi. Even after the genetic fusion, the Sith's rigid caste system remained in place. Priests and warriors, called Kisai and Masasi respectively, were two of the prominent classes. Later in their history, those that bore the elevated title of Sith Lord became relatively common, but in 100,000 years of their existence, the Sith only ever had one monarch overlord. Ruling nearly 3,000 years before the rise of the Galactic Republic, King Adas was a massive, regal being encased in majestic ebon warrior armor. Raised from his youth as a chosen being due to the charcoal pigment of his skin, Adas demonstrated great intelligence, fighting prowess, and a tremendous aptitude for Sith magic. With his alchemically forged battle axe, Adas led the bloody unification of Korriban's disparate nations and became its undisputed ruler. The Sith people came to believe that King Adas was immortal and that his reign would be eternal. In fact, Adas was almost 300 years old and had earned the title Sithari, meaning the Lord or Overlord, when alien invaders came to Korriban. Misshapen Force-sensitive beings, these Rakatan soldiers of the so-called Infinite Empire first attempted to lull King Adas into their confidence by teaching him how to record his essence into a pyramidal, magical device called a holocron. But the Rakata soon showed their true colors and tried to conquer the Sith people. But even at that ripe age, the Sith King refused to go quietly and introduced the invaders to his oversized axe and the unconquerable will of his people. The Darksiders were defeated, but the king gave his life to secure the Sith's freedom. After his death, King Adas's holocron passed to his Shadow Hand, his trusted advisor and second in command. Without Adas's unifying influence, wars once again raged for rule of the Sith people, with the reigning combatants arrogantly claiming the title of Sithari, and eventually forcing a relocation of the Sith capital to the planet Zeost. Eventually, almost 24 millennia after Adas's death, a proper successor to Adas seemed to come at last. Known in Republic space as the Exiles, traitorous Jedi defeated in a galactic war called the 100-Year Darkness, arrived on Korriban and cowed the Sith people with their astounding Force abilities, lightsabers, and superior technology. With the help of the ruling King Shadowhand, these Gen Jedi, as the Sith called them, lured the Sith monarch into their confidence and destroyed him. Never anticipating this stunning sequence of events, the Sith people concluded that the Dark Jedi were more powerful gods than even the Sithari. Bestowing the Exiles with Adas's holocron, the reign of the first Genari, or Dark Lord of the Sith, began. The last Lord of the Sith Empire to possess Adas's holocron was Lord Garu, who died around the time of the Great Hyperspace War. The holocron was abandoned on the planet Ashes Re until its rediscovery centuries later by the fallen Jedi Frieden Nad. Nad used it to rule the planet Onderon, where the teachings of King Adas helped usher in a new age of darkness. When the Jedi eventually freed Onderon of the dark side, they gained possession of the Sith holocron and banished it to a place where it could, presumably, never be recovered, under millions of tons of water on a scarcely known world called Kodai. Finally, here is the last bit of information we're given on Adas from the Book of Sith. The Sith kill, rage, and hate, yet their society does not fragment. It thrives. More than 3 millennia before the Republic's founding, a prodigious Sith arose. His name was Adas. He bore a glassy ebon hide and carried a pair of battle axes, one in each hand. Most others required 2 hands to swing just one axe. When Adas roared, other Sith rushed to his side or fled in terror. He enslaved the foolish and executed the idealists. When warriors challenged him, he drank their blood soup to honor their deaths. He took control, uniting the squabbling Sith, and became their ruler, King Adas. The reign of the axe lasted 3 centuries, while Adas sustained his life energy with the dark side. He was worshipped as the Sithari, or God of the Sith. Only when the great Rakatan conquerors arrived did his life end. Yet even in his death, he achieved a final victory for the Sith by driving off the Rakata. The technology the Rakata brought allowed the Sith to expand their influence and claim planets that make up the Dark Fist of Sith space. From that time, Adas's examples have been followed. It is a simple principle. A strong ruler gives power to the Empire. Encounters with the Anzadi and the Rakata during the time of King Adas proved to the Sith that they were not the only ones among the stars the Force had animated. This offended their pride and inflamed their fury. The Massassi were unleashed on neighboring worlds to snuff out all life and to expand the Sith Empire. Did those beings regret their pacifism? Did they rue the democracies and social constructs that offered no protection when invaders burned their homes? Their dead tongues do not speak. So it's not much, but that more or less was the life and legacy of Adas, first king of the United Sith species and the Sithari of legend. While he was as brutal, violent, and warmongering as the rest of his people, in many ways, he was the savior of the Sith species, the hero they needed when one of, if not the most merciless and ruthless empire to ever exist, kicked down their door. With that in mind, was Adas actually evil? Well, according to Sith morals, certainly not. Adas lived his life the way many Sith have, and in uniting his people, he surely killed many of them. But he also stopped further bloodshed through their unification. And while we would call Sith society barbaric and evil, and rightfully so, Adas was far from being evil as far as the Sith were concerned. But that's as far as the Sith were concerned. And well, abiding by their moral views isn't something that leads to happy endings for anyone. Adas was an inevitability. There was no chance that Sith society was going to develop in any other way than it did, and thus an individual like Adas eventually taking the reins was all but assured. In that way, who Adas was only a symptom of a wider sickness that had a stranglehold over the Sith species, and that sickness eventually led to thousands of years of horrors being unleashed upon the galaxy by the order of the Sith Lords. The technology the Rakata brought allowed the Sith to expand their influence and claim planets that make up the Dark Fist of Sith space. From that time, Adas's example has been followed. It is a simple principle. A strong ruler gives power to the Empire. Adas himself may have not been the most evil man to ever rule the Sith, and he may have been a hero to them, but the example he set would inspire hundreds, if not thousands of Dark Lords who came after him. And as we've learned, he had a massive influence over them long after his demise. For thousands of years, Adas's holocron was passed from one individual to the next, with many of them using it as a resource to gain knowledge on how to further their own dark ambitions. While his holocron eventually fell into the hands of the likes of Palpatine and Lumia, the individual that he arguably influenced the most was the fallen Jedi Frieden Nad, who used his holocron to complete his conversion to the dark side and set himself up as a king on the planet Onderon. And after Nad's fall, he in turn would instruct Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma in the ways of the Sith. And it's speculated that Warb Null, a dark Jedi who fashioned armor that was very similar to Adas's, and who served under Frieden Nad, was inspired to create his armor by Adas's holocron. Armor that would later grant a Jedi by the name of Teladi Kilmamen visions of Adas's conquests once he donned Warb's armor thousands of years after his death. Accounts of Adas's life may be few and far between, and we can only speculate on what he might have accomplished during his many campaigns over the course of his long life. But his legacy has lived on through his holocron, inspiring many a would-be Dark Lord to follow in his footsteps. And indeed, every Dark Lord that came after him is a direct inheritor of his station and legacy, as for all intents and purposes, Adas was the very first Dark Lord of the Sith, the Sithari of legend. And for his role in shaping all the darkness in the galaxy, Adas deserves to be recognized as one of the founding fathers of Star Wars Evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Adas? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, my members, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.